Kamal is an ecological economist here at CDU. Her work mainly focused on Indigenous communities across Northern Australia, especially linking ecosystem services and the well-being of remote communities. Her research includes developing nature-based economies and assessing the value of ecosystem services, particularly suiting Indigenous peoples and local community context. You happy with that?
Yeah, running short.
All right. Well, welcome, Kamal. Please take us away.
Thanks. I won't take too long to start with, but given that we are running short of time, firstly, thank you, all of you, for coming along on Friday morning. I'm looking at you, Veronica, and thanks for online participants. Thanks for being there. So today, I'll just focus this talk been pending for quite some time about nature markets where we are. So like an update as part of one of the projects that we've been working on for the last 3-4 years, but it's much longer than that. And I thought to merge ecosystem services and these nature-based economic opportunities that we've been kind of the space that's been quite in demand these days, at least in the environment sector. So I would like to acknowledge, in addition to Zach's acknowledgements, all the Indigenous peoples across the globe who manage their lands efficiently and deliver us ecosystem services, Indigenous peoples and local communities, and Mother Nature for delivering those services on which our survival depends. But just a quick outline for this talk. I'll just go through what ecosystem services are, just very briefly, and why do we need to value them? A lot of people question that why do we need to value ecosystem services and what value itself means. And I'll provide a quick overview where we are at the national level about these nature repair markets that's been getting in its shape, and what are the challenges that we face. And in between, I'll report some of the work that we've been doing for the last nearly 5-10 years. So many of you know that ecosystem services are the benefits that people obtain from functional ecosystems, and the term got more popular with the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment that was started by the UN back in 2000, and the final report, the framework, came out in 2005. And I was fortunate to be part of this network at that time that has shaped all my thinking all along those years. So from Millennium Assessment emerged this IPBES, which is parallel to IPCC. IPBES stands for Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, because at that time, the UN realized that we need to continue this work to highlight the importance of ecosystem services. And the purpose of these Millennium Assessment, IPBES assessments, are actually to understand what is changing in our ecosystems, and a way to deliver the services that comes to humans, so that we can understand the change in economy, in human well-being, so that we can inform policy decision-making to invest more. But it has taken a lot longer than that to convince the governments and to come to that kind of level of thinking. And still, there is a lot going on in that space. But the recent assessment that I've had the opportunity to be part of, this IPBES Nexus assessment that has been finalized last year in November by the states across the globe in a UN event. Part of that Nexus assessment that I was involved in is there is a chapter on financial investment in nature. So how much financial investment is happening and what is needed? And also, what are those transformative pathways that we need to change the way we operate these days so that we can achieve what we really need for our living, rather than going after GDP and these dominant economic paradigms. So that was quite a big learning curve. And one of the things that actually I proposed in that Nexus assessment is a wheel of transformation. So if you ever happen to check that assessment, it will be released soon, the full assessment. At this stage, summary for policymakers is available online. So there is a nice picture of demonstrating that we as humans together, it's a very collaborative effort, we need to change the way we think and operate in the nature and nature systems. So the key points that I want to highlight before we dig deeper, that quite often people perceive value is all about dollars. So values could be marketable or non-marketable. They could be dollar values, they could be non-dollar values. So we all value many aspects in our lives, in our living, that are much more beyond monetary values. So we need to broaden our kind of thinking in that space. And valuation of ecosystem services, there has been a lot of debate in this space, especially from conservation scientists, that if we are conducting valuation of ecosystem services, it means we are trying to commodify it. It doesn't equate to commodifying or privatization. Valuation just helps us to bring that ecosystems, natural systems are important to a policy decision-making table. So we can actually highlight the importance of nature and its services for our decision-making, whether they are linked to economics or something else. So we can account for those things. And does not necessarily means that we want to kind of put that dollar value as a static value. So I want to highlight that ecosystems are complex and they require a whole of systems approach. Same with the economy, it requires a whole of systems approach rather than the siloed kind of approaches that we've been thinking. So the supply and demand, as it works in economics, it doesn't apply to natural systems, because natural systems, if the whole system is working well, only then we can get the supply of ecosystem services. So ultimately, like when we are talking about ecosystem services values, people think like when we're talking about investment in nature, because we will be talking about these nature pair markets, there is that underlying thing in a lot of thinking that if we are assessing the value of ecosystem services, that's the investment that is required. So that's also not true. Okay? Because the investment required is to maintain those ecosystem services that flow from that ecosystem or the nature systems. So it's different than the value of ecosystem services itself. So, and lastly, I just want to highlight that economics is not all about markets. It's not all about money. And I work a lot in that well-being kind of space, linking Indigenous well-being with ecosystem services, with the lands that they manage. So we try to use very different set of tools to highlight how managing country is important for Indigenous peoples and for their well-being. So there are ways to highlight that. So there has been a lot of advances in the recent years at a global scale to push for these nature-based economies, nature-based solutions. The first kind of report that came in 2020 was led by this collaborative effort by the TNC and Paulson Institute and others. What they tried to make is that there are a lot of people that's working in that group from conservation background, and they're thinking, we haven't made so far an economic case to push for investment in nature. And I'll come to that one while we are saying so. And then in 2021, this landmark report was produced by Professor Partha Dasgupta, whose work I've been following for quite some time. And this came from the UK. And in this particular report, he has highlighted, coming from a very kind of high-profile, globally high-profile economist, he has highlighted that biodiversity should be embedded at the top in any economic decision-making, in any business decision-making. So the first kind of report, and it went very viral across the global network. And then a couple of reports have been produced by the United Nations on the state of finance for nature. And all these reports, they progressed from one state to another, highlighting that the investment so far is very tiny proportion of extraction of resources that we get from nature. So highlighting that how can we kind of change this pathway on which we are like trying more extractive economies to shift towards more transformative economies that are in line with nature, in harmony with nature. So the recent report is in 2024, the State of Finance for Nature, that highlights that we need a substantial increase in private as well as public investment in nature to continue the kind of services that we need. Okay, So why this all happened, like all those global reports, what they're trying to highlight is, if we look at our economy, it's globally about $101 trillion a year. And out of that, cost of externalities that private businesses impose on nature is $9 trillion per year. And if we look at investment, it's just the tiny portion. So the private and public investment together is about $154 billion a year, which is less than 2% of those 9 billion. We are returning only a very, very tiny portion of what we are extracting from nature, and knowing that it's fundamental for our well-being. And when you look at private investment, who are the major beneficiaries of nature and nature's resources, they're investing only $26 billion a year. So the reports that I've produced, the figures vary a little bit. This is for kind of 2024 report, 2022, 2024 report, where they highlighted this is this. What did I do? Yeah, so it's a touch screen, therefore. Yeah, it's about $26 billion a year, which is, that means 17% is coming from private sources, but rest 83% is coming from public sources, or global citizens across the globe. We are the ones who are investing back in nature rather than making the private sector to invest in nature. So depending on, how to fix that big problem, we almost need to double that investment in nature. With the recent State of Finance report that's saying that nearly we need to invest about $300 billion a year if we want to live sustainably on planet Earth. But there are also all these global initiatives that many of you know have been also enforcing that we need to invest more in nature. But how to invest more in nature, I think that's the question. So then it comes that one of the things that's been coming to the limelight is we need to focus for that investment in Indigenous peoples and local communities managed lands. Why so? Because so far there has been very little extractive kind of economies that come from IPLC's managed lands. So if I'm using the word, I want to combine both Indigenous peoples and local communities, because many people across the globe, especially in Asia and Africa, who are Indigenous haven't been formally recognized by their governments as Indigenous. So there is a very tiny proportion in Asian countries as well as in African countries, which are formally recognized by the governments as Indigenous. Many of them are listed under local communities. I believe I'm one of the Indigenous people from northern part of India, from the land of 5 rivers. But I am not registered as Indigenous, but I identify myself as Indigenous, as part of living from that part of the world. So that's why I'm emphasizing both IP and LCs, which compose about nearly 3 billion people across the globe. They are becoming one of the key stakeholders for attracting this investment that could happen to maintain and manage their lands, because it's a known fact that many of those lands that's been managed by the Indigenous communities are much more sustainably managed and deliver much more ecosystem services, are much more biodiverse compared to non-Indigenously managed lands, non-IPLCs managed lands. And the area of those lands vary. Our own Professor Stephen Garnett says about 38%. WWF report said about 32%, and 80% of that is in a very good shape. And Stephen et al., the recent study that they have done, that they said that protected areas, 26% is managed by IPLCs. But another report by Rights and Resources Initiative, which is quite common global initiative, they say about 50% of the land across the globe are managed by the Indigenous peoples and local communities. So hence a lot more investment in those lands. And we all know that those people have their local knowledge systems intact, and they've been managing much more conservatively compared to, when we look at broad agriculture across the developed countries, where focus is much more on profit rather than living sustainably from land. So in that space comes in nature-based solutions or nature-based economies. So what kind of nature-based solutions do we need? So nature-based solutions is a much more broader term and it has been in place for quite some time. It's not anything new. It's just the investment that's happening in this space is new. So nature-based solutions are about protecting and sustainably managing and restoring nature or modified ecosystems that could also address social challenges and enhance human well-being and biodiversity benefits. So it's a quite nice, broad definition. Within nature-based solutions, and I think PEST sits in there as a market-based approach. Okay, nature-based solutions can embrace anything, non-market, market-based kind of approaches. But if we narrow it down, PEST stands for Payment for Ecosystem Services, and that is much more like a mechanism that deals with financial investment, financial incentives. So just to be digging a bit deeper into payment for ecosystem services, it's already operating like across the globe for the last so many years. But the worth of this economy is about $36 to $42 billion per year. And the key features of a PES is, as many of you would know, it's a voluntary monetary transaction. There is one provider, there is one beneficiary, and there is at least one service that gets delivered. And there is a conditionality that this service is, it's been provided. So there is a tangible measure attached to it. So this component, what I'm saying is additionality, like, you know, we want something to be done to a system. So that there is one thing more than what was existing there. This element of additionality is very much well embedded in PES techniques, because in any of the PES approaches that's been implemented in the past. And they focus quite a lot on well-defined ecosystem service, and which is quite, those two elements, I'll come to those ones, and it's been picked up by nature per market like this. And it's quite confusing when we try to deal with natural systems, which are operating in a much more holistic way, but in a much more interlinked way, in a very complex way, as I said from the start. You can't distinguish one ecosystem service as it operates in the market, like, you know, as we deal with other non-ecosystem kind of products in the market. So if you buy a t-shirt, you can just buy a t-shirt. You don't need to buy the pants. But in an ecosystem, if you're doing something for carbon, you're also doing something for soil or the nature, or, you know, it's all interlinked. It's not, cannot be isolated. And that additionality, it's not very tangible or well defined with an outline that we can say, okay, this is because of this effort, I put this, I like this much soil, I put this tree in here. And because of my efforts, this whole biodiversity that comes on that tree is main reason. So that kind of, you know, economic thinking fits behind PES. And that's where we want to move it up a little bit more towards nature-based solutions, which can be much more broader. So PES has been used quite a lot and has been quite useful to internalize the externalities and offer tangible benefits. So in a way, it has been a great start with for investors to look for and pay for those who are providing that service. Okay, so coming to the Australian context. So I had the opportunity last year in October to go for this Global Nature Positive Summit, along with Professor Anne Paulina. I'm grateful to her that she took me along for this event, because it was one of those landmark events where Australia showed the leadership that we are heading for this nature per market. So it was the first global summit, and there will be another one coming up. And that was the time after this summit came in Nature Pairville in December. That came in December 2023. And the event was following that to develop further on the nature per market. So what I intend to do here is to report the work that we literally been doing for the last nearly 10 years since I've been at CDU. And most of the work has been done with Professor Jeremy Russell-Smith's team, as I joined as an ecological economist at that time, which was like a dream job for me, and had the opportunity through that Bushfire Nature has a CRC project working with DCBR in that space to actually build up the policy case for why would we need to invest in managing country for Indigenous peoples across the North. So we produce a lot of several papers in that space on looking at the economics and shifting economics from welfare kind of expenditure towards well-being oriented incentives for people to look after their country and to account for well-being benefits that they get working on country. So highlighting a lot of that work and also bringing in natural hazards that we all did within DCVR. So just a bit of brief background where Nature Repair Market is standing at the moment. It's a volunteer market and its target is biodiversity. So that's one of the things that I feel that's an issue because still we are very narrow focused. And Nature Repair Market is encouraging land management practices that improve biodiversity. So that additionality component is well embedded there. It's the typical economics approach that has been in pest mechanisms, and that's also been kind of reflected the way we are shaping up our Nature Repair Market. I have had several conversations with DQ Nature Repair team there. So I think there is a little bit of that thinking, but it's not embedded in what they're doing. So they got a clean energy regulator as for Aqua scheme as an overarching authority looking after biodiversity credits as well as carbon credits. And under that Nature Repair Market, what government is proposing is that we can have proponents that can develop the methods. I'll come to that one. Remind me if I forgot. I'll come back to that one because at this phase, any proponent, like 10 of us sitting in this room, can develop those methods. And you can imagine what's happening at a national scale. And the ultimate is that we need to apply for a biodiversity credit like we do for carbon credits. And they got like this planner tool that can help us to calculate biodiversity credits. So it's creating, it's a developing kind of stage, this Nature Repair Market space within DQ, but they're putting some tools out. One of them is that they got this biodiversity assessment instrument. I looked at and played with some of the tools. It's weird. Weird in the sense that if you got a patch of land that's cleared and another patch of intact land that is not being cleared, you can claim credits for the cleared land for replanting native forest, but can't do much what you have managed over the years. So I got a big concern for that and have been highlighting that all the time. So the first method that's been developed under that Nature Repair is replanting native forest and woodland ecosystems. And this is not applicable to Northern Australia. I'll talk about that in a minute when we get to our work. So the others they are highlighting in the pipeline are under development. And one that I know is about invasive pest management method that's been, I think, developed by NALSMA and others in this case. And there is a rangeland method that's been led by IDA, Indigenous Desert Alliance, and others. So there is a little bit happening. And this consortium of which DCVR and CDU is a part of is Indigenous Country and Biodiversity Alliance. That's been a consortium of NALSMA, Kimberley Land Council, Indigenous Desert Alliance, Aboriginal Carbon Foundation, and DCVR and others, supported by ISIN. So under that, they're also trying to develop a method that could be similar to savanna burning. So based on thresholds, if we have any questions, we can ask Jeremy, he may be online. So that they're trying the same kind of mechanism as for NEPI to manage fire and to keep the thresholds so that we can account for biodiversity. So the work that we've been doing along with Jeremy and Professor Robert Costanza from UCL is under an ARC-funded project on developing ecosystem services economies for the Indigenous state in Northern Australia. And under that project, our main target has been to see what kind of those pests or nature-based economies exist globally. So we've got a team of whole ecosystem services group, but mainly Ronju, myself, and Jeremy and Bob, we've been working on this in this space for the last, in a very targeted way for the last 3 years. We wanted to see what are those pest mechanisms that operate globally, and especially what are the indigenous specific pest mechanisms, what are the learnings that we can take from there, and then to develop a pest that could suit nature-based solutions framework that can suit our indigenous stakeholders in the North, so across the North. And then to propose a legislative kind of infrastructure under which that framework can operate. So given a pest review was quite broad, I'm not digging into global, but looking at the different type of those funding schemes that's been operating in Australia for the last 20 years or so. Some of them fit under that pest kind of definition. So conservation agreements that many of you know, there have been significant investment in that over the years. Reef credit scheme is a new one, but has been in existence for quite some time, more than 10 years, as far as I know, working at James Cook University. And they got now that reef credit scheme given as reef credits for soil sediment abatement flowing to the reef, and also the nitrogen fertilizers that's been put on along the coast and stopping them, stopping the nitrogen-related emissions going to the beach, going to the ocean. And then we're all familiar with Murray-Darling water buyback scheme, which initially been claimed as a big success, but when you look at deeply into that scheme, there has been significant investment over the years. So I think this is what we could count for, but there are other investments that has happened, like $2-3 billion over 10 years. And if you think carefully, again, it's public money that's been invested in these schemes. And what has happened when that water was allocated initially in the Murray-Darling Basin was over-allocated, for which the government has to amend that scheme. Again, that repayment that came, that buyback that government wanted for environment to keep the environmental flows came from public bucket. So my concern is, why can't we make the polluters pay who are extracting it? So because it's the government as a representative of Australian citizens that has over-invested, over-allocated, and then we are giving money on the top of that to fix that problem, which none of us have created it. So somebody has done it, and public, because we are mostly ignorant in this space, and we end up doing, fixing the problem. And quite often that's the money coming from public sector. As I said, like even globally, so 90% of the money comes from more or less around 90, 83. If it is 80 to 90, different reports put different figures, but 80 to 90% of the money actually comes from public sector for any investment in nature so far. Aqua scheme is also more or less an example of that, where again, it's public money that goes into aqua scheme, rather than the big mining companies or the industry, private sector paying for this, who should be liable for some of this, okay? So when we looked at these figures within Australia, 97% of our finance comes from governments, that's public money, and rest comes from private sector. A little bit of that carbon economy is picking up on private investment. So in Indigenous space, we had some kind of these pest programs, IPA and Caring for Country, which are all volunteer. But so it's not, in this case, when we are looking at these two pest examples, Indigenous and non-Indigenous in Australia, the main thing is there are not, except for those reef credits and water buyback and carbon credits, there hasn't been any stringent measures attached that this is the outcome we want. And that's why we don't define them as such as pests. So when we looked at global pest schemes, so there are a lot that's operating at a local scale. And a lot of them are in that bundled kind of space where we merge a number of ecosystem services rather than just one service. And the payments are mostly like in cash, and providers are individual rather than, and beneficiaries are people, government, because they're the main ones investing in there. So the key points in these pests or so far economies, in nature-based economies that we are operating in, is they're largely funded through public sources rather than private sources. And the payments are targeted for that additionality, that you need to deliver something additional, which is fair enough. But when we look at the Northern Australian landscape, it's already if it's already well managed, that means we need to keep the flow of ecosystem services. Like if we are controlling our wildfires, we need some efforts to do that. So those efforts to manage country are counted as, like ours are counted as an effort that goes and needs incentive. Okay, so at this stage, Indigenous stewardship or Indigenous and local community stewardship is not valued in any of these systems. So it's mostly thought as if we are delivering something additional. So if you are having more biodiversity, if you've got 100 species, if you're increasing it to 150, that's where you'll have biodiversity credits. But if you're managing that biodiversity, that land for biodiversity, we don't have any mechanism so far in place for that. And that's what we are arguing, that northern landscape is much more pristine compared to southern landscape. And that's where Indigenous stewardship should be valued in that space. And we've been highlighting this for quite some time. So there is less focus on enhanced positive environmental outcomes and cost effectiveness or ensuring security or equity. There is a more focus on the wide range of methods that we are developing, to the nitty-gritty of those methods, what is required, rather than looking at the overarching goal, what we want to achieve out of this. So there is very little concern how land managers are going to apply those methods. You may have heard about accounting for nature. A lot of their methods are coming from top down, designed by the fine ecologists, but very little knowledge of what happens on ground. So those are some of my major concerns, because we are not looking at cost effectiveness. The way we are proceeding, if we are ending up in hundreds of those methods, they'll be confusing for the land managers, and they will be confusing to see the outcome, because transactional costs for each of those methods are going to be very high. So we want to see pests as a system rather than as just a market approach. We need to think broader. We need to embed Indigenous well-being in that space, that there are both socioeconomic and ecological benefits. So what I'm proposing is that we want to co-develop a ground-up framework which delivers both ecological benefits and well-being benefits for Indigenous communities. And that's the work we've been doing under that ARC project. So the argument for that is that Indigenous peoples are living all across the north, and they own or manage about 80% of the land in Northern Australia. And they, unlike many of us, they are the people who belong to that land, and they've been living there for centuries, and they're the permanent residents there, compared to many of us who come and go. So it's no-brainer to say that we should be investing, people managing their country, affording them the kind of lifestyle that they want to lead while living on country. So Nature Repair Act has one main point that is quite useful compared to earlier carbon schemes, eco schemes. So what they're saying is, under the Nature Repair Act, that consent from eligible interest holders, which is native title holders, is essential for any of nature repair projects, biodiversity projects to proceed. So which is quite a nice thing to include in there. So our rationale is that why I'm saying that we need to include both ecological as well as socioeconomic well-being kind of benefits is, when we look at Indigenous people's living, so country and people's living well-being is all connected. It's not that you can isolate one thing from another. People are part of this, I'll be right. People are part of this, and people's capabilities, which we hardly acknowledge in the formal system in which we study and apply skills. Their knowledge and skills are hardly acknowledged in this space, but that they've been managing this country for a long, long time, and at a very fine scale. rather than at a large scale. So knowing each and every bit. So those skills, those people's capabilities, I'm not going into detail, but I try to apply SANE's capability approach in here, highlighting if we got the right set of opportunities for people to use their capabilities, we can really create transformative economies there. So these transformative economies could be something like, people managing wildfires, delivering ecosystem services for many of us that we will enjoy, and that helps them to become resilient communities and enhance natural capital, social capital for all of us, not just for the communities living out in the outback. So we've been doing, Ranju and myself, we've been doing a lot of this work with the communities, developing this nature-based solutions framework, having those two perspectives and talking with people, presenting what we had from that global review, the key points, how can it suit Indigenous people? What do they want? So we have had meetings across North, and we came up with this framework, which is, we put all the indicators that we think that people told us are important to them while we are looking at. So the two main domains that we divided is healthy people and culture. Because when we were talking with them, a lot of those things are important because they're all interlinked. And healthy country and people. So under the healthy people and culture, for example, like storytelling, people said that's the best indicator for us to tell, that we're doing something on it. If we're not telling our stories to our kids, to our own young people, that means we're not doing much work there. So just one indicator tells a lot about how country can manage. Under healthy country and people, we all know about fire management, so I'm going to explain this. So they can also use specific plants, specific animals that people think can indicate what is the state of their country. And those kind of things, at this stage, our next step is to look for right set of tools. But quickly doing that what people said to us during those focus group meetings, talking with countrymen, is that we can go with simple tools, even like, that comes in under that fund, whether it's private investment or government investment, and then that can provide one legal platform for all the transactions to happen, rather than individual landholder having their own transactions, and the cost of transactions is going to be too high. And people who are going to make money in this business will be retailers or the market people. If we really want to have effective outcomes in this case, we need to set up at a central stage. That can help Indigenous land managers and other land managers to look at what could be the possibilities to reduce those transactional costs and to provide a reliable platform that people as well as investors can trust and can provide neutral legal advice in many of those matters. Sorry. Okay, I'm nearly there. Sorry. And then, if I try to compare that, I think there's one. The government's role at this phase has been as an intermediary. So the good thing, at least if we think from Australian perspective, we've got a very detailed Nature Fair Act that's been in place. So second one is that to develop methods, and that's where I'm a little bit suspicious, because we are ending up developing too many methods that will confuse both the landholders as well as the investors. And we are diving too deep to see the outcomes without, it's like human body, everything is connected. Ecosystems are well connected. There are linkers between what soil does, plants does. We can't isolate one from the other. We've got very silo approach for the methods. Like, if you're thinking about controlling invasive animals or just weeds, not thinking about biodiversity, it's not going to work. And within that, proposing like to develop a shared platform for all stakeholders, because the way we're going, these kind of methods will involve a huge transaction cost. So how to reduce or minimize that transaction cost is well, a shared platform that could be reliable and reliable for the land managers as well as for the investors, and could give a solid platform. And of course, integrity of those headers is a key question. And that's why we can go for some of those simple methods, but more technology embedded in them. So there is trust between the two parties, investors and the providers. So yeah, I already highlighted. We can take examples from Costa Rica and Mexico, who have got like these national schemes over the last 30, 40 years. Costa Rica, about 40 years, have been operating in this space. And there are a lot of lessons to learn from them. And their scheme has been much more simpler, but delivering much more benefits compared to what we are trying to target here in Australia. And we are thinking this is unique, but it's not unique. It's been there around the globe for quite some time. And we are unique in Indigenous space. So if we really want to achieve something, we need to be actually targeting both ecological benefits as well as well-being benefits for people. So when we try to look at, globally, how governments take the responsibility in this space, most of the schemes are sitting in this space where they're sharing their responsibility and they shift it either on the investors or the providers. But we are arguing that this is a paper by K. Chan and others. So the idea is that if we go for this kind of shared responsibility and a collaborative approach, that's the only way we can achieve conservation outcomes, what we want to achieve, and sustain on this planet. So the key challenges are very dissected approach that has been applied so far for one thing or the other. And it's a wide range of methods. That's a lot of concern for me for high transactional costs and can cause confusion among land managers. And I want to highlight that markets are just one tool to deal with this. They're not the ultimate solution. So we need to look for a holistic approach, which could be both marketable and non-marketable. So what we are trying to propose so far, the work that we have done, is to develop a coherent and coordinated approach, the way we can minimize transactional costs. That's why that framework, nature-based solutions framework that I showed, it's arguing for this, that if we set up something that land managers can report on themselves, can save a lot of costs, because the way the AFN and other methods are developed so far, you need an external auditor. So how much land managers will get out of that if we are employing someone every year to come and report for those outcomes? We can go for a simple but reliable mechanism. We don't need to make it too complicated. So ultimate is that if we develop sustainable, efficient, equitable, and effective conservation and well-being outcomes, some methods for that, which can help us, both Indigenous peoples and help repair nature. That will be the ultimate goal through these methods. And I just at the end wanted to highlight that we are hosting this nature-based solutions kind of 11th Ecosystem Services Partnership World Conference here in Darwin. Please come along. RIEL is a member of ESP now. Thanks, Sam. So anyone who is registering, I have sent the discount code around. So if you want to register and learn more about these nature-based solutions, nature-based economies from experts across the globe, please come and join this conference. Thank you. And I'm open for questions. Was it on time? Oh.
Now we just only have time for one or two questions in person, just because of the issues we had this morning. We're just running a little bit behind. But I also encourage anyone who's online to shoot Kamala an email or reach out to them, so we'd be happy to answer questions. And if not, join us for morning tea. And I'm sure you can answer more questions there as well. But if there's anyone in the room or online that has a question or two before we go.
Yeah, I've got a question. It's just about the control of birds and how that fits into the economy. Because if I was an alien zoologist coming to this planet, I would immediately see that wildfires are far better for the environment than control of birds. The problem is the words hazard reduction. The very idea of hazard reduction is the reduction of all the rotting trees, dead trees, which is a real problem, because that's really where the biodiversity is. So after controlled burn, you'll find the ground is completely naked. There's no dead trees. A wildfire usually actually goes through very quickly, actually leaving even more dead trees lying on the ground. So, I mean, this is particularly, of course, relevant to Australia. Were there other countries where they control burn?
Yeah, a lot of examples.
And hazard reduction is the main key thing. Like say an alien coming to the earth because I'm not interested in the value of private property or the value of human life. But as biodiversity, wildfires would be better than controlled burns. How does that fit into your economic thing? Was that never been considered?
Well, so far the evidence doesn't say that the wildfires are better for biodiversity. So anywhere across the globe, because if you're looking at dead trees with cool burns, dead trees will still be there. But wildfires are both hazardous as well as bad for the environment. No, for natural life as well. There hasn't been any evidence saying wildfires are good because
hazard reduction, particularly backburns and stuff, completely destroy all, not only just the dead trees and stuff, but all the biodiversity in the soil stuff. So it is a problem, you know, because I agree that, you know, we need to, value human life as a value. But coldly as a zoologist, it'd be better to just forget about hazard reduction. The very hazard is what life's about.
But yeah, but yeah, I can understand, but wildfires are also hazard for biodiversity itself. I mean, we are part of biodiversity, but we have dominated the global space. But it's
they change the environment, the types of trees, the whole of the biomass. Okay, fire goes through and it looks terrible, but there is no over a long term, 1,000 years or so. There's no change in the.
Well, I can send you some papers which my colleagues have done some work on, especially Kakadu National Park is a great example where if fires are managed compared to Wolfar project, where fire management started a long time ago, like 2006, working in that team. I can say that there is quite nice evidence showing that if the fires are managed like in Wolfar compared to neighboring places, that it delivers much better outcomes for biodiversity and natural systems as such, rather than just thinking about that it's wildfires that's delivering the benefit. Because the frequency of wildfires have increased so much. If you're thinking about 100 years back, before colonial time, people have managed fires on this continent for a long, long time. So the question is now, since they've been stopped, so we are getting these huge and vast wildfires that cover thousands of hectares. So the intensity and the spread is much more compared to what we can think would have been in the past. So if you're thinking those wildfires before this our present time, yeah. So yeah, so yeah.
But it is sort of worth considering that this problem all the time of hazard reduction does mean an incredible loss of biodiversity, because you are removing all. You've only got to visit somewhere where fire. I sort of don't want to get bogged down with this, so but I just sort of thought it was interesting that you don't sort of see that as being always a problem when it comes to money, as you're putting a value on private property and human life. Because that's the only reason we do all this so-called hazard reduction.
Oh, well, wildfires are managed not just for hazard reduction, but for a lot of other things as well. I'm happy to have this discussion. Alan, you wanted to add something?
Well, I think we're confusing wildfires and different biomes.
Yeah.
So the wildfire situation you're describing is in forest.
Yeah,
and exactly. Yeah, the sort of the prescribed territory. No, it's not about hazard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally agree. Right.
Yeah, because it's not about hazard reduction, it's all about managing the landscape. That supports biodiversity as well. So it's not entirely for human kind of economic gains that we are doing it. Indirectly we get the benefit, but we are also responsible to look after the landscape that we live in. Yeah. Any other questions?
I may have to wrap us up now. Sorry, Kamal, because we're running out of time. But I'll just like everyone to join hands to thank Kamal for a great presentation. And then if everyone would like to join us in morning tea in yellow 2 in the tea room, I'm sure you can ask any more questions you'd like to Kamal then. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Well done. For being patient with these issues. Sorry, we had a bit of back and forth, but we were.
I tried to rush through.